interessante tyd in ons lewe, so is nog iets wat ons kan terugwys. Ons het hierso online met julle gekwarantyne. So daaroor gepraat, wil ons sê julle moet in isolasie gekwarantyne wees, ons het baie cool boeke hierso agter. So as daar groot vrae is waarmee julle stoei of enigiets, moenie die geleentheid daarvan mis om nie alleen te kwarantyne nie. Gryp vir jou boek en kom praat met ons ook na die tyd oor die boek en die goed as jy iets hierso gegryp het vir jou. So 'n bietjie van die huisreëls is, daar is nou nie koffie nie, want mense wil nie om mekaar se koppies raak en so aan nie, en hand sanitizer, gebruik dit maar soveel as wat jy kan, ons hou ons afstand van mekaar, ek kan sien, almal is verskriklik ver uit mekaar uit, dit is goed, dit laat dit baie voller lyk, en geen hande op lê op mekaar vandag nie, ongelukkig nie, ek jammer, en ook geen hande op gesigte lê nie, waarna ek baie uitgesien het natuurlik. So volgende week gaan daar so ook ietsie vir die kinders wees, so ons gaan online, as julle op die WhatsApp groups en alles is, gaan ons vir julle ietsie stuur, ons 'n video wat ons vir die kids ook kan speel, en dan is hierdie nogal 'n cool geleentheid so in die quarantine, wat ons gaan gebruik om ons het ons Facebook pages up and running, gaan kyk bietjie ons podcast op Podbean, daar's baie cool inligting daarso buite, en die ding van die YouTube channel, terwyl jy nou daar kyk, like en subscribe, en onthou maar die klein klokkie daaronder te druk, want as jy die klokkie druk, as ons nie noodwendig kerk hou nie, maar ons het een of ander interview met een of ander internasionale rockstar of 'n local crazy persoon, dan word jy genotified daarvan. En so net hierso kyk, as jy ook op die WhatsApp groep gesit wil word, kan jy net gaan stuur julle details sommer net vir info@dialoog.org.za of alternatief, laat ek net sommer Georg se nommer vir julle gee. Julle kan hom sommer direk kontak, dit is 072 786 3736. Ek sal dit weer op die einde sommer vir julle lees, as julle wil deel raak van die WhatsApp groups en alles wat ons hier so doen, ja. Kyk of ek iets gemis het. En ook in die gees van quarantyne het ons gedink, ons gaan bietjie hoor, wat se games wil julle online speel, so ons gaan so traai 'n dialoog online, dalk Fortnite kompetisie hou, wat ek nogal baie na uitsien, so ons 'n bietjie vra of julle belangstel, as julle regtig belangstel, stuur ook sommer net 'n mail na info@dialoog.org.za, of as jy reeds op die WhatsApp groep is, ek sal later iets net vra, soos, stuur dit was 'n game Joel, dan gaan ons bietjie ietsie traai, uitfigure daarso, wat nogal lekker vir my klink. Dan ook daarby, so bietjie meer ernstig, ons gaan almal op ons databasis kontak, so as julle ook van iemand weet, enige ou mense of enige siek mense en julle support of hulp nodig, jy weet, voel vry om in kontak met ons te kom, ons is regtig besige gemeenskap om te help, en wees maar veilig in die quarantyne tydperk, dit is, ons kan dit so lekker maak soos dit moontlik is, en ek bly, ons skakel nog in by ons gemeenskap op hierdie manier, dit is lekker, ons gaan aanhou met dit selfs na quarantyne, sodat almal van oorsee ook kan kyk, so en dan is dit, gee oor aan Johan, dankie.
Cool, so unfortunately, or fortunately, Andre spoke in Afrikaans, because when he speaks in English, he's often told me that English oral was his most spiritually rich time. I want to touch this now, but it's somewhat dangerous. His most spiritually rich time, because he would always call on God to return just before it's his chance to do the English oral. So it's been a crazy few weeks. I think people will reflect back on this time as the great toilet paper famine. We've seen panic buying. Actually, I have a friend who went shopping. She's got a baby. She's trying to buy baby wet wipes, and it was literally taken out of her trolley in this frenzy by these sophisticated Pretoria East tunnies and stealing wet wipes. That's what we've been reduced to, I guess. Also, a term that I've never heard before, cough shaming. Never felt worse about coughing in public ever in my life, and the various efforts that we go through in terms of to try and cover our cough is almost silly. And we've seen funny memes. I had an awkward moment last night. I went to a wedding. I had an awkward moment with my cousin because I realized that we constantly talk about sport. That's basically what we talk about. And then we had this awkward silence because for 5 minutes we had nothing to talk about. If you go on the Supersport website, which is a religious activity of mine, which is just to follow the latest sport, it's just this event is cancelled, this one is postponed, this is cancelled, this is cancelled. And even our conversation there was cancelled. And we even see, I mean, I find myself every 5 minutes just checking my phone to read about the latest numbers, to get a checkup of sorts. So it's quite bizarre in how addicted I am to the news, latest coronavirus information. So it's a little bit silly. And there's a movie, Contagion. Who's seen the movie Contagion? It's a 2011 movie. It sort of just disappeared in obscurity. Now it's the top streamed movie on all of these various platforms, starring Matt Damon. It's kind of cool, kind of scary, kind of, dare I say, accurate. It doesn't feel like a movie that was filmed in 2011, but now everybody is on that, and we obviously have time to do that. I've seen images of a deserted Venice and a deserted Rome, and I take tours there almost every year, and I never thought that I would see St. Mark's Plain of Venice totally deserted. It's bizarre. Rome, the same thing. We've seen blame shifting happening between China and America, and this quite pathetic war of words between the two most powerful countries in the world. And this has obviously given conspiracy theorists a lot to work with in terms of who's really behind the virus. We've seen a travel ban. It's the year of the face mask. It's also probably the worst possible time in history to be on a WhatsApp group. I am on WhatsApp groups for my complex where I live, and a lot of tannies there telling me constantly, this is the latest news, most of it fake news. But yeah, it's a very bad time to be on a Facebook, WhatsApp group at least, and a Facebook group for that matter. And then obviously some of the other implications is the fact that the stock market crashed. This makes 2008 Wall Street crash look like kindergarten. And everybody is predicting a global recession. And the world has gone a little mad. And even when I examine my own heart, I have to admit that in the beginning I went from denial to where I am now, which is very concerned. And it's been this roller coaster. And I need to ask myself, why am I reacting the way that I am? And I think we need to ask ourselves, why are we reacting the way that we are reacting? Now, there are many reasons for it, but I think one of the more prominent reasons why we are reacting the way we do is because we do not know how to deal with death. Death is the great interruption. It's an insult. As Shakespeare reminds us, we are worm food. And this is something that we try and hide. This is something that we do not reflect on as a modern culture. He says this: we are literally split in two. Man has an awareness of his own splendid uniqueness in that he sticks out of nature with towering majesty, and yet he goes back into the ground a few feet in order to blindly and dumbly rot and disappear forever. This is a contradiction that we struggle with, the sense of majesty, the sense that there's something unique about us, that our consciousness does not simply cease, but then this very real realization that what happens in death is terrible. Modern people write endlessly about love. We have songs about love, but we never write about death. And it's funny because love might elude us, but death will not. Death will get us, yet we don't talk about it, we don't write about it, we don't sing about it. We've hidden death in hospitals. That's where people go to die. That's very unique. Not that long ago, people died in their houses. You saw your mother die in front of your eyes. There's a theologian that I like to read. He had 11 children and a wife, and he saw every one of them die in his lifetime. And this is not 60, 70 years ago. But as moderns, we've hidden death. We hide them in hospitals. We hide death. We pay people to deal with the body, afbob or whatever. We hide death in supermarkets. We think that chicken is born vacuum-packed and in a fridge. We hide the whole process of death, and when we see it, we are outraged and sign petitions. But that's because we're hiding death. We think that druivels grows from butcheries, from the roof, and it's this beautiful thing. No, we hide death from ourselves. And we even try and hide death from our kids with all sorts of silly stories. There's this one story where this boy's dog, let's call him Royce, the dog, not the boy, and Royce, the dog, died, and this little boy, let's call him Andre, was very distraught. And then after a while, he goes to his parents and he says, "Mom, where's Royce? Royce, the fox terrier." And they say, "Well, he's with God now. He's in dog heaven." And then little Andre said, "But what does God want to do with a dead dog? That doesn't make any sense." And it's as if God, it's as if kids at least call this bluff. They see through this sentimentalization of death. They see that something else is at play, but we hide it. We are embarrassed by death. Anthropologist Jeffrey Gorer argues that contemporary culture has replaced sex as the new unmentionable with death. So a few years ago, you didn't talk about sex. If you grew up in a very conservative Afrikaans family, you didn't talk about sex. And this can be said for many conservative cultures around the world. Today, we cannot stop talking about sex. It's all we talk about. But now there's one thing that shall not be named, and that is death. There's a guy called Mark Ashton. He's a vicar, or he was a vicar at St. Andrew's Church in Cambridge. And he was in his 50s. He was a pastor, and he was diagnosed with unoperable cancer. And through his faith, he sort of made sense of it. And then he didn't have peace. He obviously wrestled with it, but he was able to speak about his impending death. And he would go to the hairdresser, and at a hairdresser, you chit-chat. So they asked him, "How are you doing?" He said, "Not that bad. I've been diagnosed with unoperable cancer." So, and he wants to continue the conversation, but they usually chit-chat about everything. And he says he couldn't get a single word out of the hairdresser or any of his colleagues because death was in the air. We cannot talk about this. It's rude even to talk about death. We do not accept and prepare for death. We only avert and deny it. We are, as I said, embarrassed by death. Ancients handled it much better than we do. Okay? Our ancestors handled it much better. Why? Because, first of all, they saw death around them. They were not separate from it. The second thing is that it's a pretty new invention to think that there's no life after death. Most people found some sort of meaning in death. It was horrible, but they were able to reconcile themselves to death because they found meaning in it, whether it is joining your ancestors, whether it is going to paradise, whether it's returning into the ocean, you are just this drop going back into the ocean, whether it's African or Eastern or Christian or whatever. We've been able, historically, to find meaning in death. But us moderns are horribly, especially within a secular culture, and especially secularists, are horribly equipped to deal with death. And I think this describes and explains this franticness that we are seeing at the moment. This is what Tim Keller says about death. And I think he's trying to pinpoint that we do not have the resources to deal with death. He says this: if death is truly the end, if we all die and eventually even the whole human civilization dies in the death of the sun, then nothing we do will make any final difference. If we come from nothing and go to nothing, how can we avoid even now a sense of nothingness? Right? This will overwhelm us. So if this is how we're going to react, if we contemplate on death, then we must hide death. Don't think about it. If we realize that this is the implications of death. Now, many would scoff at this, and they say they'll put it on a bus. This is from a few years ago. Richard Dawkins with their bus campaign. Stop worrying. God probably doesn't exist. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. Now, unfortunately, that slogan only works when there's not a mass pandemic. Okay, now it's just patronizing. But guys, stop worrying. God doesn't exist. The virus looks pretty serious. Stop worrying. God doesn't exist. So just enjoy your life. That is advice or a slogan that can happen in a very small part of the world. It can happen in places in Europe. It can happen in North America. And after this virus, it cannot even happen there anymore. It's just horrible advice. And that's how hollow I think that worldview is in the face of genuine obstacles. Some secularists have tried to make it romantic, this whole thing of death. There's this popular scientist, Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think I've pronounced his middle name correctly, and he says, there's this clip on YouTube, you even have music in the background as he talks about it, and he says, when I die, I do not want to be cremated. Is it cremated? I want to go into the ground, and I want to decompose, and I want to fertilize, I want to go back into the earth where I came from. And you can put Enya music in the back, but that is still very depressing. Even if a smart scientist says it with nice music in the background, it's not going to help. That doesn't do anything for me. It's a little bit like when you're talking to a child and you're telling him, look, when death comes, just watch Lion King. It's the circle of life, really. It's the circle of life. It's so nice. And if that child is smart, he will say, that is depressing, I do not want to be fertilizer. If he is smart. So we need to get rid of this sentimentality. I don't think it works at all. When people talk about this and saying, just enjoy your life, it's a little bit like this. Imagine there's an intruder in your house, and he says, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you in a few minutes, but look, I'm not heartless. What is the thing that gives you joy in life? Do you like a game of chess? Do you like to play a bit of Fortnite? Maybe a game of tennis? What gives you pleasure in life? So you say, no, I really like a game of chess. Okay, let's play chess. But remember, I'm going to kill you in an hour. Are you going to enjoy this little game if you know your impending death is just around the corner? No, you're not going to enjoy it unless you are a sociopath or worse. So to try and fill this gap and say, you know what, death is just one more thing. No, it's an intruder that's going to kill you, and that's going to change how you relate to things in the here and now, the things that are supposed to give you a bit of pleasure, like your game of chess or whatever. It makes us unique as humans, as a matter of fact, the way that we relate to death. Ernest Becker, he says this, it is a terrifying dilemma to be in and have to live with. The lower animals are, of course, spared this painful contradiction as they lack a symbolic identity and the self-consciousness that goes with it. Listen to this. He says, the knowledge of death is reflective and conceptual, and animals are spared it. They experience death as a few minutes of fear, a few seconds of anguish, and it is over. But to live a whole lifetime with the fate of death haunting one's dreams and even your most sunful days, that is something else. Do you understand what he's saying there? He's saying, if you watch Discovery Channel, yes, it might be sad to see the impala flustered, realizing that here's death around the corner, there's a lion attacking him, and there's anguish and there's pain, and then it's gone. But an animal doesn't have the conceptual identity to ponder his own existence, to think about the fact that he is going to die. He doesn't have the resources to do that. As humans, we do. And Ernest Becker says it's horrible. What a terrible fate to know that death is coming. And it haunts my dreams and even my most sun-filled days. That is why the best we can do as a secular culture is what Dylan Thomas says, rage, rage against the dying of the light. Fight, fight, fight. That's all we can do. Like I said, I don't think our modern culture has the resources to deal with death. Our modern culture does not have the spiritual and internal resources to deal with the coronavirus. Because hashtag no regrets doesn't cut it right now. Hashtag one life, live it. You know, that thing that people with Land Rovers always have on the back of their cars. Hedonism doesn't work right now. And I think in that sense, the virus has exposed us a bit. We are now once more reconciled to our own mortality. There's a beautiful psalm, Psalm 90, verse 12, that says the following: "Teach us to number our days carefully, so that we may develop wisdom in our hearts." Teach us to number our days carefully, so that we can develop wisdom in our hearts. That's Psalm 90, 90, verse 12. When you go to a funeral, for a brief moment, and this is what happens to me when I am in the presence of death, just for a moment, I get a little bit of perspective. I'm not sure if you have the same experience when you're at a funeral. But the rest of my life, I'm obsessed with money, I'm obsessed with stuff, I'm obsessed with a performance, with looks, with everything that consumes human behavior, right? That's what we do. Just go to a magazine shelf in any of the spas, and you will see what we are obsessed about. Stuff, looks, sex, that's what we do. But then when we are confronted with death, when we're at a funeral, for a moment, for a brief moment, we stop being insane. Just for a brief moment, we stop being complete idiots. And in that sense, death is a smelling salt. It's not something that's nice. You know, when people are in a coma or a little bit unconscious, then sometimes they use this smelling salt, and it's so potent, it just wakes you up. That's maybe what this virus is doing. That's what death does. We hide it, so we never get to smell it. So we never get to wake up and to contemplate things. And when I'm at a funeral, then what goes through my mind is I always walk out there and I say, Johan, don't be shallow. Because I've never gone to a funeral where somebody says, let's say it's Yaku who died, or Prosper, you're going to die one day. Nobody ever goes to a funeral and say, Prosper was very attractive and super rich. Let's pray. You know, nobody ever says, Vetty drove the nicest car and he had amazing teeth and he has a very good fashion sense. Nobody ever says that. But yet that is all we are concerned about for the rest of the time, except at death, when we get a little bit of perspective, when we stop being insane for a second. So when I'm at a funeral, and maybe this is something that this virus is confronting me with, it shouts the following: don't be shallow. How are you living your life? What is really important? Death asks questions. We don't like answering them. We don't like thinking about these questions. But that is what it does. It's the smelling salt. We also cannot help when death comes to judge ourselves. At a funeral, I'm always judging myself. What am I doing? I'm asking these questions. Here's the reality, friends. And this is why perhaps death is the beginning of wisdom, being confronted with that idea. It's this breaking of that innocence. Psalm 90, verse 12, teach us to number our days carefully so that we may develop wisdom in our hearts. Everything will be taken from me. My house, my wife, my 30-day-old boy, my clothes, my body, everything. And I need to wrestle with that reality. I need to ask deeper questions, and so do you. This might make me less shallow, but it doesn't make me less scared. To ask these questions might make me a little bit more deep, but it doesn't make me less scared. And that is okay. As Christians, we shouldn't be denialists. In other words, we shouldn't say, no, death, nothing, it's over there, let's just hide it over there. And that's what I accuse secular culture of doing. But likewise, we shouldn't be sentimentalist. When people go to a funeral and they share rubbish advice like, God just came to pick his most beautiful flower first. I mean, that person, should not be able to use hand sanitizer for a month. When we say, I can't wait to be with God in heaven, it's going to be so much fun, we must be careful. We must be careful of saying things like that. We shouldn't sentimentalize death. In John 11, we read this very strange account where Jesus is about to do a miracle, as he does. And he's going to Lazarus, and we read this. This is John 11. It's very triumphalistic almost. When Jesus heard it, in other words, Lazarus is very sick, he said, this sickness will not end in death, but is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. That sounds very Christ-like, very God-like, very heroic. Then, a few verses on, this is in John 11, a few verses on, 11 verse 11, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm on my way to wake him up. Again, it's so stoic, so strong, so heroic. And then he gets there. He pitches up, and here's his friend Lazarus, and he's dead. And he sees his sisters, Mary and Martha, and they are crying. And what's his reaction? He knows exactly what he's going to do. He's going to resurrect him. We know the story. I mean, that's Lazarus. When somebody wakes up at 11 a.m. in the morning, you say, "Good morning, Lazarus," or you awake from the dead. We know how the story ends. He wakes up. Jesus knows this. And what is his reaction when he sees everybody crying? John 11, verse 32, when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and told him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews who had come with her crying, he was angry in his spirit and deeply moved. "Where have you put him?" He asked. Lord, they told him, "Come and see." And then the shortest verse in the Bible, John 11, verse 35, Jesus wept. Jesus wept. This word that is translated as angry is a very bad translation, where it says he was angry. And then my translation tries to expand a little bit. In his spirit and deeply moved. It doesn't do the trick. That word is violent. Jesus was enraged. He was besides himself. Why? Because I think Jesus saw the tyranny of death. He realized that it's such a monster. It's overwhelming. And we should cry in the face of it. We should shake our fists in the air. He does it. And he's about to heal this person. He knows exactly how the story is going to end. But he's moved by it. And that is because we must grieve. We must admit that death is a monster. If we do not do that, we do not give it any justice. We, as Christians, cannot sentimentalize death. We should weep. We must grieve. But Paul, who lost many people in his life, including his own life, he died as a martyr. In 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 13 to 14, he tells us how we must grieve. He says, "Concerning those who are asleep," in other words, those who are dead, "do not grieve like the rest of the world without hope. Since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, in the same way, God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep through Jesus." What is Paul saying there? You guys must grieve. It's a command, grieve. But do not grieve like people without hope. Does that make sense? As Christians, we cannot be denialists. We cannot be denialists, but we definitely cannot be sentimentalists. We must grieve. We must shake our hands. We've got a whole book in our Bible called Lamentations. Read the Psalms. We must grieve, but we should not grieve with people without hope. In the ancient world, in the Greek world, they called what we call a cemetery the place of the dead. That's what they called it, place of the dead, Hades. Christians called it cemetery. You know what that means? Those who are asleep. That's how you grieve. That's how you grieve as a Christian. It's terrible that these people were taken from us. But we have a future hope. They are but asleep. The climax of the Christian story is where Jesus himself dies on the cross. A terrible cross, something that we cannot sentimentalize. I've said this a million times, and I'll say it a million times more. We wear crosses around our necks. We have it in our houses. But it is the equivalent of wearing a torture instrument around your neck, an electric chair, or a lethal injection. Nobody will say, "Oh, that's beautiful. You've got a nice gold lethal injection around your neck." Or you've got the most beautiful, electric chair bracelet. Well, that's effectively what it is when you wear a cross around your neck. It's an instrument of torture, an instrument of death. If you're a Christian, then that is the thing that we hold up in church every day. We don't have a venue and we're not allowed to put crosses up here, but that's what we do. We hold up a cross every day, every Sunday. And we say that this is the climax of our story. So we shouldn't be flustered by death. Death is the thing that's the biggest part of our story. We need to remind ourselves of the suffering of the cross. We need to stay there. But the story does not end there. The story does not end on the Friday because there's a Sunday. Resurrection Sunday. In Shakespeare's epic play, Hamlet says at one stage of death, "Oh, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns." Oh, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns. Hamlet was wrong. Okay? Arnold, I know that you're an English teacher and you love Shakespeare, but Hamlet was wrong. Jesus returned from death. And that gives us hope. In 1 Corinthians 15, Paul reflects on this and he says, "O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?" We have a victory over death through Jesus. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And if we have to try and figure out how Jesus' death is and resurrection is transferred to us, I mean, that's going to take a whole lot of sermons to deal with it. And given the fact that we are in quarantine, maybe we can do it. But maybe this will help. On the 2nd of November 2019, can anybody tell me what happened on the 2nd of November 2019? Shame on all of you, and I will tell you why. Because on the 2nd of November 2019, the Springboks, representing South Africa, defeated the English in the World Cup final with an emphatic score, 32-12. It's not even fair, okay? You start to feel sorry for the English after a while. And for that moment, that 2nd of November, nothing could touch us in South Africa. I drove home and people were hooting. People I've never met high-fiving me before virus hand concerns, right? People hugging me. There was a drunk guy who came to me 20 times hugging me and congratulating me on my victory. I saw for a week or two all of our petty political squabbles that we have in this country just disappear because of what happened. Now, here's the question. I have never met any of the Springboks. I've never met the 15 or the 23 guys who played on that 100-meter by 50-meter piece of grass in Japan. Okay, it's thousands of miles away. I've never met any of them, okay? Why is what they did on a piece of grass in Japan, why is that giving me hope? Because they represented me. That is why that drunk guy in Dros could come and congratulate me on my victory. Why? Because they represented me. And you know what? Every now and then, subsequently, when I read the news, when I talk to people or whatever, I would get a little bit despondent about things in South Africa, and I might think about this and ponder about that. And you know what really helps? When I watch the highlights of 2nd November 2019, and I see Colby's step, and I see Owen Farrell grasping at nothing, and I listen to the commentary. It just works. I'm a sucker for it. It works every time. And then I listen to Siya Kolisi's speech afterwards, and Rassie Erasmus talking, and then I'm good to go. Again, I can last for a few days. As Christians, in a time like this, we need to watch the highlights of the resurrection over and over again, because that was a much bigger game. It was a game between probably one of the best fighters, sportsmen in the history of the world, called Death. Hasn't lost yet, okay? He wins everyone, and up until that point, he's defeated everybody. And he's up against this guy called Jesus. And it looks like he's going to win this one as well. You might say he didn't win Lazarus, but there was a round two. He eventually got Lazarus as well. Lazarus is dead, I'm sorry to say. So now he's up against Jesus. And what happens? Death wins. Undefeated, yet again. All right, it's like the All Blacks or Tiger Woods at one stage. You can't win this guy. I'm sorry to compare them to Death, but Just follow along. And it looks like it's the end, but then there's this massive comeback, literally a comeback, a resurrection. And you know what? In the same way that the victory of the Springboks belongs to me, and it gives me hope, likewise, the victory of Jesus over death belongs to me and belongs to you, inasmuch as you support him, so to speak, in as long as you belong to this team. And it's voluntary. You don't even have to immigrate anywhere. You can just belong to the team. That victory belongs to all of us. That is why 1 Corinthians 15, verse 56 to 57 says, he gives us the victory through Christ. Now look, there's a lot more going on in that passage. I can promise you that. There's a lot more going on in this representational theology. It's more than this, but it's not less than this. So if we want hope, ponder, go look at the highlights. It will change your heart, I can assure you. There's this great poem called Dialoog Anthem, which is so appropriate for us, right? Dialoog Anthem. It's written by a guy called George Herbert, long ago. He says this. It's a dialogue between Christian and death. Christian says, alas, poor death, where is thy glory? Where is thy famous force, thy ancient sting? Death, alas, poor mortal, void of story, go spell and read how I have killed thy king. Christian, poor death, and who was hurt thereby? Thy curse being laid on him makes thee accursed. Death, let losers talk, yet thou shalt die, these arms shall crush thee. Christian, spare not, do thy worst, I shall be one day better than before, thou so much worse, thou shalt be no more. Think and ponder and contemplate the resurrection. It will lift you up. It will give you hope. Jesus' victory is ours. To be very honest with you, in the last few days, yes, there is a sense of being reconciled to our own mortality, but that wasn't really the thing that shook me. I think it's unmasked another idol in me, and that is an idol of economic security. That's more the thing that I've been worried about. Not dying from this virus, maybe because I'm relatively young. I've got asthma, so apparently I shouldn't be that comfortable. But I haven't been afraid of death. But with the global recession that we're heading into probably, and the fact that I make a lot of my money by taking tours overseas, and I mean, that's the first industry that went, right? And all sorts of thoughts crossed my mind, and I've been anxious in the meantime. And it's definitely not me, not only me. If you had shares in Sasol, one of the great South African companies, your shares dropped by 90% overnight. Imagine having 1,000 rand turn into 100, just like that. And you can do the math. I've already had 2 friends, qualified people, lose their jobs in less than 2 weeks, being retrenched. And our economy will probably shrink by 6%. I can tell you now that this is going to hit a lot of people. Domestic workers will be asked not to come in, and it will be no work, no pay. I mean, we can see how many people are here. Chances are that we are going to have to, well, we're probably going to cut the services here and just move entirely online. And when people are stuck, as we are, then the first or the second thing that they cut is their giving to the church. So this will have implications on all of us, probably. And I am ashamed to say that I have been anxious in the last few weeks. Not about the death thing, but about the economic thing, which maybe exposes the thing that we fear more than death even. And I've got a month-old baby, which also complicates things maybe a little bit. And your mind goes to where you must cut and where you must loan and where you must run and what you should do. But, alas, it doesn't stop there. Psalm 90 verse 12 gives us perspective. It says, your days are numbered. And here's the thing, here's the message of Psalm 90 verse 12. You can't take anything with you. Your house will be taken from you, your car will be taken from you, your insurance will be taken from you, your baby will be taken from you, your wife will be taken from you. Everything will be taken from you. The only thing that cannot be taken from you is God's love. That's the only thing. And it might sound like a cliche, or maybe it sounded like a cliche 3 weeks ago. I bet it doesn't sound like much of a cliche now. The only thing that cannot be taken away from you is God's love. A lot of people have tried to take their wealth into the grave with them. A lot of pharaohs, especially in Egypt. You know what happened to it? It's now in the British Museum. Okay? You can't take anything with you. Everything will be taken from you. There's this professor, Addison Leach, and he was a theology professor, and he was in missiology. And two parents were very upset because through his classes, he persuaded two of his students to go into full-time missionary work. And their parents were outraged by this because these guys are very, very bright kids. They've got a big future maybe in the structures of the church or maybe in academia or whatever. And they went into, they stopped their studies. They didn't go, they finished their, let's say, their BA degree, but they stopped further studies, what do you call it, postgraduate degrees. So these parents came to him and said, this is irresponsible, what you are teaching our kids. They must at least get a master's degree before they can go do something like that. And this is his response. You want them to have security? We are all on a little ball called Earth, and we are spinning through space at millions of miles an hour. Someday, a trapdoor is going to open under every single one of us, and we will fall through it. And either there will be millions of miles of nothing, or else there will be the everlasting arms of God. And you want them to get a little master's degree to give them a little security. You think a master's degree is going to help you with this? A little bit of perspective. The smelling salt of death can wake us up and give us this broader perspective. I think the church, I think Christians around the globe, we have a wonderful opportunity now to not be part of all the anxiety, to not run around frantic and buy frantic and be obsessed about various things. We've got such a good opportunity now to not live in that kind of fear. That doesn't mean we should be stupid. That doesn't mean that we should be cavalier. But it does mean that we do not have to grasp. We don't have to grasp at wet wipes, at tissues, or canned food. The only thing that we really need to grasp is God. Or better yet, fall and allow Him to catch us. That will change our perspective. That will change our heart. We need to watch the highlights of the resurrection again and again and again. And we've got no excuse. We're in quarantine. We all have our various monasteries set up across the globe where we can ponder that. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, we are scared, we are confused, there's so much uncertainty, and we don't know what's going to happen to our various professions, our pay. We don't know what's going to happen to our bodies physically, to our loved ones. And it's almost shaken us up out of this daydream that we've had, this daydream of control, this illusion of control. And we realize that we are way more fragile than we could ever imagine. Well, as we are wrestling with this fear that is gripping us, as we are trying to make sense of it all, I pray that this will be an opportunity, Lord, where we can smell the smelling salts of death, and that we will ask the big questions, that we will not hide behind hedonism and stupid taglines. But Lord, I also know that when we ponder death and when we think about it, the only thing that can give us a little bit of hope in the face of that is to ponder the reality of your resurrection, to know that more than 2,000 years ago, in a place in Palestine, you died, and death gave its worst, and you defeated it. And although when we are confronted with death, it is scary, it is often overwhelming. When we are confronted with the fear of death, likewise. But your victory, your resurrection on that hill is given to us. There's this famous benediction by St. Patrick that you guys know as St. Paddy's Day, but unfortunately that's a bit of a corruption of the original St. Patrick. He was a great missionary to the Irish, and after they wanted to kill him, he went back, and I think he evangelized the King of Ireland at that stage. And he's got a massive benediction. It's called the Breastplate Prayer of St. Patrick. But I just want to read one section of it. I rise today through God's strength to pilot me, God's might to uphold me, God's wisdom to guide me, God's eye to look before me, God's ear to hear me, God's word to speak for me, God's hand to guard me, God's shield to protect me, God's host to save me from snares of devils, from temptations of vices, from everyone who shall wish me ill, afar and near. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you, Arnold, and thank you all. So do we have any questions? I know that there was maybe one or two questions that came through our online platform. So to all our, online safety-conscious germaphobes, I think at one stage we had, how many? About 20 of our online community. Well done, guys. I'm proud of you. 20 of our online community. And I wanted to tell you guys that it's very rude when you guys sniff, even if it's in your home and you are in a church service. And it's also very rude to attend this place without pants, really. It's not good enough. So next week, Sunday, please dress appropriately. That's the one thing. And yeah, let's maybe do one or two questions. What's your hand up, Rose? Mm. Okay. So let me just repeat that question. So why do we make such a big fuss about humanity? And maybe it's arrogance that humanity is above animals. And perhaps this coronavirus came because of human arrogance. So on the one hand, I agree with you. There's definitely something, I mean, I have no idea. I mean, nobody has an idea. Well, everybody has opinions, but nobody really knows how exactly this thing came about. But it looks, I mean, yesterday I heard a veterinarian say that it's because the Chinese, as Trump would say, they are eating, is it pangolins? Which is an endangered species, and something happened there, and it's very wrong what's going on there. And it's true that we've overconsumed and that we are maybe toying with things that we shouldn't toy with, and there are a lot of movies about that, whether it's Jurassic Park or some version of it. I mean, that is perfectly possible, but I think we still need to get a little bit more information about exactly the origin of this thing. The one thing that I can appreciate what you're saying, Royce, and it's a very hippie thing to say, and it's a very popular thing to say. There's a guy called Peter Singer, who's an ethicist at the University of Princeton, and also an environmentalist, and he says that it is it is more problematic to kill a dolphin, an adult dolphin, than a child up until 3 years old. It's on the same level. Now, once you begin with that kind of reasoning, it might sound like you are being an environmentalist, but it's sort of an eco-fascism that very quickly steps in. And I don't think people really think it through very well. So, for example, I've wondered whether we are not far from having to take out licenses to have a fly swat. So if you're going to hunt flies, maybe you need to take out a license for it. Because we are hopelessly inconsistent in which animals we value and which animals we do not value. So, for example, Lorraine, my wife, your sister, just so we know that who we're talking about, we visited friends on a farm a while ago, and Lorraine was very distraught by, I mean, she loves lamb. I bride it for her a few days ago, but she was very distraught when she saw a lamb being tied up and given to one of the workers as a Christmas bonus. And she told the farmer this, and this farmer is this very sort of close to the ground Englishman. He said, you know what, Lorraine, come with me. Come with me. I'm not sure why I'm doing the accent. I'll just continue normally. Let's walk here in the mealies. Okay, here in the corn. Okay. First of all, what I want you to do is let's walk here among the cattle. Okay. Do you hear that? Do you hear that? Hear what? Can you hear the crickets? Can you hear all of these things? Can you hear it? Yeah, I can hear. There's a lot of birds and whatever. Okay, now let's quickly go to the corn. Can you hear anything? No. You know why? Because I killed them. I killed them because otherwise they eat the plant. Okay, so I need to get rid of all the insects. What you're seeing here is a mass genocide of all sorts of insects, all right? So the vegetarian stuff that you eat, you don't know how many things I had to kill for you to eat your environmentally conscious piece of corn, okay? So maybe we need to break a little bit the sentimentality. So when we say we are not necessarily above the animals, I am curious where one draws that line. When you drink antibiotics, you are killing just a very lower form of animal, one way or the other. So I think it's not easy to say that. It's a little bit inconsistent. And I think we do realize that although we need to be stewards of this environment, we need to take care of it. We're not doing a very good job of it at the moment. We are consuming way too much. That is perfectly true. There is no doubt in my mind that there is something very unique and special, and I agree with Shakespeare, we tower above nature. So yes, sometimes we reduce ourselves to animalistic behavior, but when a lion kills an impala in the Kruger National Park, it's not on the front pages of Rapport the next day. Lion murders impala, only 400,000 left in the Kruger. But when we murder, then it is, because we realize there's value in that life. Forgive me for this very crude example, but it's not the same thing. When Texas, your dog or the family dog, he likes to run out of the gate. And when he runs out of the gate, chances are he's going to see another dog. And if it's a particular time of year, he might want to approach this dog for certain needs that he might have, okay? I've noticed that nor Texas nor any other dog that I know asks permission before that whole process occurs, okay? It just happens. That is rape, if we want to be all human about it. And we do not hold Texas or Shelby or Chappie or the other dog called Royce accountable to the same level of behavior that we hold humans to, because we believe that there is something of God's image in us. And with that comes a certain sense of value and a massive sense of responsibility. Maybe another question or comment. Online question. Let's go.
So, Corey asked this, that basically, your first thanks for the right was like a research, and then you start everything off. But
Okay, so the question is, who should we listen to in a time like this? That's one of our online users. I like saying this. One of our online fans, our partitioners, ask, who should we listen to? So I want to talk about that a little bit more tonight. And it's difficult to listen to everything because we literally look for the updates every 5 minutes. And then the next moment, this guy from the World Health Organization said, no need to worry. This guy says, panic, panic, panic. We read these accounts from Italy. Then we hear that it's like the common cold. Then we hear that we shouldn't pay attention to this because, I mean, I think we are somewhere around 13,000 deaths, but you can find many other diseases who've killed more people in the same period, so maybe it looks overwhelming, but it isn't. Now, let me just make that comment first and say that I think if a guy like Donald Trump, who's willing to kill the environment because of his economic sensibilities and loyalties, if he is willing to break the American economy, then it must be very convincing, okay? So for a Republican government who's all about financial growth and whatever, for them to make big decisions like that tells me that this is not something with a massive agenda. I think the fact that the globe, whether you are a right-wing Turkey under Erdogan or a left-wing ANC government in South Africa, everybody's responding the same way. Iran, they hate America or they hate the West. They could have said, Western nonsense. No, they also reacting in the same way. So I think when it comes to the fact that this is a pandemic and that it is dangerous, is something that we can take seriously. So in terms of the facts, definitely don't listen to me because I'm just going to listen to other people as well. In terms of how to respond to this thing, I am definitely not going to take my cue from, we're not talking about the health stuff, we're talking about the emotional stuff. I'm definitely not going to take my cue from secular culture or from government or from any of that. I'm going to take my cue from Revelations. The Revelation 17. Now, to talk about Revelations in such a post-apocalyptic time as we're living in sounds a bit weird, but just listen to this. When I saw him, I fell at his feet like a dead man. He laid his right hand on me and said, "Don't be afraid. I am the first and the last and the living one. I was dead, but look, I am alive forever and ever. And I hold the keys of death and Hades." This was revealed to John, the beloved disciple. He was in Patmos. He was in quarantine. He was in isolation. His people were dying all over the known world at that stage, Christians. Pandemics. If we think coronavirus is bad, you have no idea what sort of plagues went into these cities of the Roman Empire at that stage. And what would happen is the Greeks, the rich would typically retreat and they would go to their villas whilst the rest of the people would die. Not today. A few months ago, you could still go to Italy and you could go to the island of Capri, and there you will see the villa of, I think it is Caesar Tiberius on this Capri. And that's where he fled because there was a massive plague in Rome. So he left Rome, hung out on the island just himself, and then every now and then when he got a traitor, he would just throw him over the rock. It's not a bad place to be in quarantine. So this is where John is. And things are really bad. And he reads this, "Don't be afraid. I am the first and the last and the living one. I was dead, but look, I am alive forever and ever. And I hold the keys of death and Hades." Now, that means that my inner world will not be dependent on circumstances. Because circumstances are going to change. Sometimes it's going to be good, sometimes it's going to be bad. Sometimes it's going to, we cannot allow ourselves to be moved like this, like like teenagers at school or babies, crying one minute, laughing the next. There's a consistency that we have in God. So yes, we can listen to the numbers. Yes, we can listen to the medical breakthroughs that's coming and certain behavior that we're going to do. But in terms of our inner world, I do not want to listen to anyone but God and Scripture. And that's definitely, don't think that this is just something that's lofty and it's got nothing to do with reality. Oh no, that will depend on your generosity. But this verse will have a massive impact on your generosity. It will have a massive impact on your spending habits, on the peace that you have, etc. So it is it is not a trivial thing at all. But instead, I will tell our online users, instead of reading the latest updates every 5 minutes, read Revelations 1, verse 17 to 19. Read it over and over again. Read through the Gospels. Read the Gospel of John. Read the account of Jesus raising Lazarus, going from being triumphalistic over death to being hurt by death. And read that story all the way through to the resurrection. Listen to those voices. And then once the scientific voices have some sort of consensus, we can listen to them as well. It's very important what we fill ourselves with in this time. Maybe a last question, online or present. Are we good? Rock and roll. So, what I want to remind you guys of, those of you who are here, we are just under 100. So I'm very glad that we're not illegal. But it was touch and go for a while. I actually had to ask our baby to leave. I'm worried Ramaphosa is going to come and shut us down. We've got books there. If you have specific questions that you are wrestling with and you're going to go into quarantine now and maybe data is not something you have, or maybe you relate to books, come and talk to me now afterwards and I would gladly make some recommendations and I'm sure some of us will be there and we can also make recommendations. That's the one for the brave ones over here. Please stay updated in terms of, I know a WhatsApp group is annoying. We will try and only populate it with non-hysteric things and resources. Also, please go on our Facebook page, like it, and try and follow it for a bit, because we're going to give regular updates there, and not just updates, again, resources, quotes, podcasts that you can listen to, spiritual resources that will make this quarantine worth it for you spiritually. I really think that we can make this quarantine count, actually. So please watch that. And then in terms of community activities, we're going to do stupid, childish things like play a video game. So please make your recommendations in terms of video games. If you want to play online chess, we can do that as well. And when we play video games, I want Arnold. Obviously, you must play. Tannie Christine, also in the team. Tannie Christine, I think, is pushing 70s. But she's definitely going to give her a virtual gun and see what she does with it. So we're going to do silly things like that. And then what is very important is that we have we have an eldership in this church, although we don't call it that. And we've asked them to contact you. All right. So and this is important in a time like this. And we just ask them to ask you a simple question. That is, what is something that you are scared of at the moment? What is your biggest fear right now? And in community, we want people to talk you through it and pray with you through that. So we really want to use this time to grow spiritually. So if you want more information, you can either send an email to info@dialoog.org.za, and we will find that, or you can WhatsApp me or phone me. I'm just going to give my number for better or worse. My number is 082-491-2463, and then Gior, who's also part of the leadership and very involved, is 072-786-3736. If you have prayer requests, if you need food, if you need cash, if you need somebody to talk to, or if you need the login details for the computer game, talk to us.